They say the palace has no windows in the lower halls, not to keep light out, but to keep secrets in. That night, when the king fell, no one heard him scream. No guard rushed to his side. No council member dared to intervene. Only she did, and when her lips touched his, the ancient world trembled, because some bonds are not written in law, but carved in blood and sealed with a kiss that should never have happened. What Amara didn't know was this: saving a king's life is easy. Surviving what comes after is impossible. The stone floors of the Valther's palace were always cold, even in summer. Amara had learned this during her first week as a maid. Learned it through her knees, through the ache in her joints as she scrubbed hallways that stretched like veins to the heart of a kingdom she would never truly belong to. She was 23, though some days she felt ancient. Her hands were rough, her back perpetually sore, and her uniform, a plain gray dress that hung loose on her thin frame, was 2 sizes too large. It had belonged to someone else before her. Everything here belonged to someone else before her. The palace was a cathedral of shadows and whispers, built from black marble and lined with crimson tapestries that seemed to absorb sound. Chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings like frozen tears, their light dim and golden, casting long shadows that moved even when no one walked past. It was beautiful in the way a graveyard is beautiful, cold, reverent, and utterly indifferent to the living. Amara moved through it like a ghost. She had perfected the art of invisibility. Eyes down, shoulders hunched. Silence, always silence. The other servants had taught her that much. Don't look at them, Mira had said on Amara's first day, gripping her wrists with brittle fingers. Mira was older, her skin pale and papery, her eyes sunken. She'd worked in the palace for 30 years. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for heaven's sake, don't ever let them see you bleed. Amara had nodded, not fully understanding. She understood now. The palace was home to the vampire aristocracy, the oldest bloodlines, the most powerful families. And at the center of it all was him, King Kalen Valtherus. She had never seen him up close. Few humans had. He was a figure glimpsed in passing, a tall silhouette moving through corridors, always surrounded by guards, always untouchable. The servants spoke of him in hushed tones, their voices tinged of fear and something else. Awe, perhaps, or reverence. He was said to be over 1,000 years old. Some claimed he had built the kingdom with his bare hands, others that he had conquered it in a single night of blood and fire. The stories varied, but the essence remained the same. King Kalen was not a man. He was a force, a storm contained in flesh. And Amar was nothing, a maid, a poor black girl from the southern slums who had been lucky or unlucky enough to be hired during a labor shortage. She cleaned rooms she would never sleep in, polished silver she would never touch outside of work, and tried not to think about how fragile her position was. One mistake, one complaint, one moment of visibility, and she would be gone. That night, Amara was assigned to the Western Wing, a section the palace rarely used, filled with old meeting rooms and storage chambers. It was quiet work, which she preferred. No nobles wandering past. No risk of accidentally making eye contact with someone who could have her dismissed with a word. She moved through the dimly lit corridor, her cloth and bucket in hand, the smell of lemon oil sharp in her nose. The air was cooler here, almost damp, and the silence felt heavier. She could hear her own breathing, the soft shuffle of her worn shoes against stone. She was halfway down the hall when she saw him. At first, she thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light. But then she saw the hand, pale, long-fingered, outstretched on the floor as though reaching for something just out of reach. Amara froze. The figure was slumped against the wall, half hidden in the alcove where 2 corridors met. Dark liquid pooled beneath him, spreading slowly across the stone. It was too dark to be water, too thick. Her heart hammered in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to leave, to forget she had ever seen this. But then the figure moved, just barely, a shallow, shuddering breath. Amara's hands trembled. She took a step forward, then another. The bucket slipped from her grip, clattering against the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. She knelt beside him, and that's when she saw his face. King Kalen Valtherus. Even in the dim light, even pale and weakened, he was unmistakable. High cheekbones, sharp jawline, hair black as midnight, falling across his forehead in damp strands. His eyes were closed, his lips parted, and his chest rose and fell in uneven, labored breaths. He was dying. Amara's mind raced. She should call for help, scream for the guards, run, do something, but her body wouldn't move. She stared at him, at the dark veins spreading across his neck, like cracks in porcelain, at the faint shimmer of something unnatural in the blood pooling beneath him. Poison. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. The smell was wrong, acrid, metallic, laced with something bitter. And the veins, they pulsed faintly, as though the poison was alive, crawling through him. Help! The word was barely a whisper, so faint she almost missed it. His eyes opened, just a sliver, and for a moment she saw them, crimson, burning, ancient, and then they closed again. Amara's breath caught. Her hands hovered over him, shaking. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know anything about vampires, about their weaknesses, their remedies. She was just a maid, just a girl who cleaned floors and tried to stay out of sight. But she couldn't leave him here. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, a memory from childhood. Sometimes, child, the only way to draw out poison is to pull it through the wound. Cut it, suck it, spit it out, fast, before it spreads. It had been about snake bites. But this was different. Vampires didn't have ordinary blood. Their bodies didn't work like hers. Still, her hands moved before her mind could catch up. She leaned closer, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She could smell him now. Cold stone, old wood, something faintly floral. Jasmine, maybe, or lilac. And beneath it all, the poison. Sharp, wrong. She pressed her fingers to his jaw, tilting his head back slightly. His skin was cool to the touch, but not cold. Not yet. This is insane, she thought. This is going to kill you. But if she didn't try, he would die anyway. And something deep inside her, something she didn't understand and couldn't name, refused to let that happen. Amara closed her eyes, leaned down, and pressed her lips to his. The world exploded. It wasn't a kiss. It was fire and ice, lightning and silence. Every nerve in her body igniting at once. She tasted the poison immediately. Bitter, burning, crawling down her throat like acid. She forced herself to breathe in, to pull it from him, her hands gripping his shoulders as her body screamed at her to stop. She sucked in once, twice. The poison filled her mouth, her lungs, and she jerked back, spitting it onto the floor. Her vision blurred. Her head spun. She gasped for air, coughing, her throat raw. And then she felt it. A pulse. Not from him. From between them. Something invisible snapped into place, like a thread pulled taut. A connection. A bond. She felt it settle into her chest, warm and heavy, like a second heartbeat. Amara staggered back, her hand flying to her sternum. She stared at the king, who was still motionless, still pale. But the dark veins were fading. Slowly, the poison was retreating. She had saved him. And in doing so, she had bound herself to him in a way neither of them could have predicted. When King Kalen Valtherus opened his eyes minutes later, the first thing he saw was her, kneeling on the cold stone floor, trembling, her lips stained dark, her eyes wide with fear. And for the first time in 1,000 years, his heart, silent for so long, beat once, just once. But it was enough. He sat up slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled. The weakness was gone. The poison had retreated into nothingness, leaving only a faint ache in his chest, not physical, but something deeper, something he couldn't name. His crimson eyes fixed on her, and Amara felt the weight of his gaze like a hand pressing against her throat. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Who are you? His voice was low, smooth, carrying the weight of centuries. Amara opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her tongue felt thick, useless. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You touched me. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. A statement of impossibility. I'm sorry, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. You were dying. I didn't know what else to do. You kissed me. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and dangerous. Amara's face burned. I was trying to remove the poison. My grandmother, she told me. Your grandmother, he interrupted, taught you to save a vampire king with a kiss? She flinched at the mockery in his tone. No, she taught me to save people. I didn't know. You didn't think. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, towering over her. And yet here we are. Amara scrambled backward, her hands slipping on the cold stone, her heart hammered against her ribs. I'm sorry. I'll go. I'll leave. I won't tell anyone. Stop. The command froze her in place. She stared up at him, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He stepped closer, crouching so they were eye level. This close, she could see the details. The faint scar above his left eyebrow, the way his pupils contracted and expanded like a cat's, the impossible sharpness of his features. What is your name? Amara, she whispered. Amara. He repeated it slowly, as though tasting the syllables. Do you know what you've done, Amara? She shook her head. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Not kind, not cruel. Something in between. Neither do I. He stood, turning away from her. For a moment, she thought he might leave, might simply walk away and pretend this had never happened. Instead, he spoke without looking back. Stay here. Don't move. Don't speak to anyone. I'll send for you. And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. Amara sat there, alone in the dim hallway, her hands still trembling, her lips still burning from the poison. She had saved the king's life, and she had no idea what would cost her. Amara didn't sleep that night. She returned to the servants' quarters in a daze, her body moving on autopilot while her mind spun in endless circles. The small room she shared with 3 other maids felt suffocating, the walls too close, the air too thick. She lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, feeling the strange pulse in her chest that hadn't been there before. It wasn't painful, not exactly, but it was there, a presence, a weight, like someone had reached inside her ribcage and planted a seed that was now slowly taking root. By dawn, she was exhausted but wide awake. The other maids rose silently, dressing the dark, avoiding eye contact as always. Amara followed suit, pulling on her uniform with shaking hands. You look terrible, Mira muttered as they filed out into the corridor. Are you sick? No, Amara lied. Just didn't sleep well. Mira gave her a long, searching look, but said nothing. In the palace, curiosity was dangerous. It was safer not to know. The morning passed in a blur of routine tasks. Amara scrubbed floors, polished silver, carried linens through endless hallways. She kept her head down, her movements mechanical, trying desperately to blend back into invisibility. But something had changed. She felt eyes on her, constantly. Guards that had never looked at her before now tracked her movements. Nobles paused in their conversations as she passed. Even the other servants seemed to watch her, with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. By midday, the whispers had started. Did you hear? The king summoned a maid to his private chambers. Which maid? One of the new ones. Dark skin. Quiet thing. Nobody important. Why would he? Who knows? But the steward's been asking questions. Amara's blood ran cold. She ducked into an empty storage room, pressing her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. This was exactly what she'd feared. Visibility. Attention. Questions. She was about to step back into the corridor when footsteps approached. Not the soft shuffle of servants, but the sharp, deliberate click of expensive boots on stone. The door opened. A man stood in the doorway, tall and severe, dressed in black robes embroidered with silver thread. His hair was white blonde, pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and cold beauty. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless. Vampire nobility. You are Amara. It wasn't a question. She nodded, unable to speak. I am Lord Theron, head steward of the palace. The king has requested your presence in the council chamber. Immediately, Amara's legs felt weak. I don't understand. I haven't done anything wrong. That remains to be seen. His expression was unreadable. Come. She had no choice. She followed him to the palace, acutely aware of every stare, every whisper that followed in their wake. The council chamber was in the eastern wing, a place she had never been allowed to enter. The doors were massive, black oak reinforced with iron, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Lord Theron pushed them open without effort, and Amara stepped inside. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with tall windows that let in streams of pale afternoon light. A massive table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Several were occupied, and at the head of the table sat King Kalen. He looked different in daylight, sharper, more dangerous. He wore black from head to toe, his coat tailored perfectly to his lean frame. His hair was pulled back, exposing the clean lines of his face. His eyes, when they met hers, were unreadable. Approach. Amara forced herself to move forward, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She stopped a few feet from the table, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes fixed on the floor. Look at me. She obeyed, lifting her gaze to meet his. The room fell silent. King Kalen studied her for a long moment, then turned to address the others. This is Amara, the maid who saved my life last night. A ripple of shock passed through the council. Amara saw them clearly now, 6 vampires, each radiating power and age. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. A maid! The speaker was a woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. You expect us to believe a human servant saved you? I expect nothing, Lady Seraphine. I am stating a fact. How? Another council member leaned forward, a man with a scarred face and hands like claws. How did she do it? Kalen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She removed the poison. With what? Magic? Alchemy? With her mouth. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Seraphine spoke first, her voice dripping with disdain. A kiss. An extraction, Kalen corrected coldly. She drew the poison out before it could reach my heart. And you allowed this? The scarred vampire's voice rose. You allowed a human to... I was unconscious, Lord Darius. I had no say in the matter. Then she should be executed. Darius slammed his fist on the table. For daring to lay hands on... She saved my life. The words cut through the room like a blade. Kalen's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. I will not execute the person who saved my life. Not for doing what any of you were too late or too incompetent to do. The council members bristled, but none dared to argue. Amara stood frozen, barely breathing, feeling the weight of ancient hatred pressing down on her from all sides. Lord Theron stepped forward. Your Majesty, there is another matter to consider. Kalen's eyes narrowed. Speak. The mark. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Amara watched as every vampire at the table went very still. What mark? Kalen's voice was low, dangerous. Theron gestured to Amara. May I? After a pause, Kalen nodded. The steward approached her, and Amara fought the urge to run. He reached out, his fingers cold as he tilted her head to the side, exposing her neck. She heard someone gasp. There, Theron said quietly, just below her ear. Amara's hand flew to her neck. She felt it then, a raised pattern on her skin, about the size of a coin. It hadn't been there yesterday. She was sure of it. What is it? She whispered. No one answered. Every vampire in the room was staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to outright horror. Finally, Lady Seraphine spoke, her voice hollow. The covenant mark. The symbol of the bloodbound. That's impossible, Darius breathed. The bloodbound died out centuries ago. The ritual was forbidden, the knowledge lost. And yet here it is. Theron released Amara, stepping back, marked clear as day on a human girl who kissed our king. Amara's mind spun. I don't understand. What does this mean? Kalen rose from his chair slowly, his eyes fixed on the mark on her neck. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It means you didn't just save my life. Amara, you bound your soul to mine. The room began to tilt. Amara stumbled, and suddenly he was there, his hand gripping her arm, steadying her. The touch sent electricity through her skin, and she felt that pulse in her chest again, stronger now, insistent. The bloodbound, Kalen continued, his eyes never leaving hers, were pairs chosen by fate. One vampire, one human. Their lives intertwined completely. If one felt pain, so did the other. If one died, both died, Seraphine finished. It was considered the highest honor and the greatest curse. Amara pulled away from Kalen, her heart racing. No, that can't be right. I was trying to help. I didn't know. Intent is irrelevant. Theron's voice was cold. The mark has appeared. The bond exists. The question now is, what do we do about it? Kill her. Darius stood, his eyes gleaming. Before the bond solidifies. It's been less than a day. If we act now. You would kill me as well, Kalen said flatly. Better that than have our king bound to a human, a servant. Choose your next words carefully, Darius. The threat in Kalen's voice was unmistakable. Darius fell silent, but his hatred was palpable. Lady Seraphine leaned back in her chair, her expression calculating. There may be another option. The old texts speak of a severance ritual. Difficult, dangerous, but possible. How dangerous? Kalen asked. 50% mortality rate, for both parties. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. You're talking about killing me. We're talking about freeing our king from an unnatural bond with a creature beneath him. Enough. Kalen's voice cracked like a whip. Amara is under my protection. No one touches her. No rituals, no executions, nothing. Not without my express command. Are we understood? Reluctant nods around the table. Good. This council is dismissed. Theron, arrange quarters for Amara in the North Tower. She is no longer a servant. She is... He paused, searching for the word. A guest of the crown. Your Majesty. Dismissed. The council members filed out, each casting dark looks at Amara as they passed. She stood alone with Kalen in the vast chamber, the afternoon light painting long shadows across the floor. Why? She asked quietly. Why protect me? He turned to face her, and for a moment, she saw something flicker across his features. Confusion, perhaps, or fear, because, he said slowly, for the first time in 1,000 years, I can feel my heart beating, and it only beats when I'm near you. He walked past her, his footsteps echoing. Don't mistake this for kindness. Amara, I'm not protecting you. I'm protecting myself, because if you die... He paused at the door, not looking back. I'd die with you. The door closed behind him with a sound like thunder, and Amara stood alone in the council chamber, her hand pressed to her neck, feeling the mark burn beneath her fingers like a brand. She was no longer invisible. She was bound to the king, and the entire palace wanted her dead. Amara stood at the window of her new chamber, staring out at the palace grounds below. From this height, the gardens looked like an intricate tapestry, hedges carved into geometric patterns, fountains gleaming like jewels, paths winding through carefully cultivated wilderness. It was beautiful, cold, perfect, nothing like the cramped servants' quarters where she'd spent the last 6 months sleeping on a cot barely wider than her body. This room was enormous. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in midnight blue silk. Mahogany furniture gleamed in the lamplight. Thick carpets muffled every footstep. A private bathroom with a clawfoot tub. A closet filled with dresses she would never have dared to touch in her former life. But the door was locked from the outside. Guest of the crown. Protected. Imprisoned. 3 days had passed since the council meeting. 3 days of isolation. Broken only by servants who brought meals and departed without making eye contact, and by Lord Theron's brief visits to ensure she hadn't attempted to escape or harm herself. No one explained what was happening. No one told her what came next. And worst of all, she could feel him. The bond, the mark, whatever it was called. It pulsed constantly now, a thread connecting her chest to something vast and distant. She could sense him moving through the palace, could feel the weight of his presence like a storm on the horizon. Sometimes late at night, she felt flashes of emotion that weren't hers, frustration, rage, something that might have been loneliness. It terrified her. On the fourth day, the door finally unlocked. Amara turned from the window to find a woman standing in the doorway. Not a servant. Her clothes were too fine, deep emerald velvet with gold embroidery. Her skin was a warm brown of polished teak. Her hair a cascade of black curls pinned with golden combs. She was perhaps in her 40s, beautiful in a way that suggested both strength and grace. Amara, the woman said, her voice melodious with a faint accent. My name is Alara. I've been assigned as your companion. Companion or warden? A small smile. A bit of both, I imagine. May I come in? Amara gestured vaguely. It's not really my room to refuse you. Alara entered, closing the door behind her. She moved with the fluid grace of vampire nobility, but her eyes held something different, warmth, perhaps. Or pity. You're human, Amara said suddenly. Alara's smile widened, very observant. Yes, I am. One of the few allowed to live freely in the palace. Why? Because I married a vampire lord 40 years ago. I was his bloodbound. Amara's breath caught. He died 30 years ago. Illness. The same one that's been killing vampires for the past century. The withering, they call it. Alara settled into a chair, gesturing for Amara to sit. I survived because the bond had weakened over time. That's the secret they don't tell you. The bloodbound connection can fade if both parties allow it. How? Distance, emotional walls, deliberate separation. It takes years and it's painful, but it's possible. She paused. But you're not here to discuss that. You're here because you need to understand what you become. Amara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the silk comforter. What have I become? A threat? A miracle? A curse? It depends who you ask. Alara's expression grew serious. The bloodbound were once considered sacred. When a vampire and human formed a bond, it was seen as a gift from the old gods, proof that love could transcend the divide between mortal and immortal. This isn't love, Amara said quickly. I don't even know him. Love isn't required for bond to form. Only a profound act, usually sacrifice. You risked your life to save his. That was enough. Alara leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand. The vampires of this court don't see the bloodbound as sacred anymore. They see them as weakness, a liability. The king, bound to a mortal who could die from a simple infection? Intolerable. Then why hasn't he killed me? Because he can't. Not without dying himself. And more importantly, she hesitated. I think he doesn't want to. Amara laughed bitterly. You didn't see the way he looked at me, like I was a problem to solve. That's because you're a problem. The greatest threat to a king isn't an enemy army. It's vulnerability. And you, Amara, are his vulnerability made flesh. Before Amara could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Alara rose, opening it to reveal Lord Theron, his expression as cold and carved as marble. The king requests her presence in the throne room. Now! Amara's stomach dropped. Why? That is not your concern. You will come. Alara shot Amara a look, calm, reassuring. I'll accompany her. Theron's lips thinned, but he nodded. Very well. But do not delay. They walked through the palace in silence, Alara at Amara's side, Theron leading the way. The corridor seemed darker than before, the shadows deeper. Servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, eyes downcast. Whispers followed in their wake. The throne room was vast, a cathedral of black stone and crimson glass. Light filtered through stained windows, painting the floor in shades of blood. At the far end, elevated on a dais of obsidian, sat the throne itself, all sharp edges and ancient power, and upon it sat King Calen Valtherus. He looked like a painting. Perfectly still, one hand resting on the arm of the throne, his expression unreadable. He wore a crown of black iron and ruby. Simple, brutal, undeniable. The room was full. Nobles lined the walls, all vampire aristocracy, all watching with hungry eyes. Amara recognized several from the council meeting. Lady Seraphine stood to the king's right, her silver hair gleaming. Lord Darius to his left, his scarred face twisted in barely concealed contempt. Amara felt the weight of their collective gaze like physical pressure. "Approach," Kaelin commanded. She walked forward, Alara remaining at the edge of the crowd. Every step felt like walking through deep water. When she reached the base of the dais, she stopped, unsure whether to kneel or remain standing. Kaelin rose from his throne, descending the steps until he stood before her. This close, she could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He looked tired, ancient, dangerous. "I have called this assembly," he announced, his voice carrying through the vast space, "to address the matter of the blood-bound bond between myself and this human." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "It is unprecedented," he continued. "It is inconvenient, and it cannot be ignored." He turned to face his court. "Some of you have suggested execution. Others have proposed a severance ritual. All of you seem to believe this bond makes me weak." "It does," someone called from the crowd. Kaelin's eyes flashed dangerously. "Does it? Let me clarify something. The blood-bound connection does not weaken me. It reveals weakness in those who would use it against me." Silence. "Any attack on Amara is an attack on me. Any conspiracy against her is treason against the crown. Any attempt to sever this bond without my consent is an act of war." His voice was cold steel. "Have I made myself clear?" Reluctant acknowledgement from the assembled nobles. "Good." He turned back to Amara, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, almost like regret. "However, this situation requires adjustments. Amara cannot remain a prisoner in the North Tower, nor can she remain ignorant of vampire politics, our customs, our dangers." He glanced at Alara. "Lady Alara has agreed to serve as her tutor. She will teach Amara how to navigate this world, how to survive it. In return, Amara will—" He paused. "Cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" Amara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "With me, with this bond. We need to understand it. Its limits, its rules, its weaknesses. That requires proximity, communication, trust." "You want me to trust you?" The words escaped before she could stop them. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "I want us both to survive this. Trust is optional. Survival is not." Before Mara could respond, the doors burst open. A guard stumbled in, his face pale, his armor stained with something dark. "Your Majesty," the eastern border attacked. Kaelin was moving before the man finished speaking, his hand going to the sword at his hip. "By whom?" "Rogues. A hunting party. They killed 3 of our patrols, and..." The guard's eyes cut to Amara. "They left a message, written in blood." "What message?" The guard swallowed. "Kill the human, free the king." The throne room erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted over each other, some demanding action, others calling for Amara's immediate execution for the good of the realm. Lady Seraphine's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "This is what happens when you bind yourself to a mortal. You've made yourself a target, made us all targets." "Silence." Kaelin's roar shook the chamber. This attack was not random. Someone hired those rogues. Someone in this room is conspiring against the crown. His gaze swept across the assembled nobles, and Amara saw several of them flinch. "Find them," he commanded the guards. "Interrogate the survivors. I want names by nightfall." Then he turned to Amara, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not anger, not frustration. Fear. "You're not safe here," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Not anymore. They'll keep trying until one of them succeeds." "Then break the bond," she whispered back. "Let me go. I never asked for this." "Neither did I." His jaw tightened. "But we don't have that luxury. Breaking the bond would kill us both. And even if it didn't, he trailed off, something unreadable crossing his face. I can't. Why not? He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, addressing the room once more. Amara will remain under my direct protection. She will have guards, wards, every defense this palace can provide. Anyone who harms her answers to me personally. He turned and ascended the throne once more, settling into it with the weight of centuries. This assembly is dismissed. Amara, you will return to your chambers. Ilara, begin her training tomorrow at dawn. Lord Theron, double the palace guard and investigate every noble with ties to the eastern border. Command issued, he fell silent. The nobles began to file out, casting dark looks at Amara as they passed. She stood frozen, feeling the mark on her neck burn, feeling the bond pulse with emotion that wasn't hers, frustration, anger, and beneath it all, a desperate, aching loneliness that made her chest tighten. When the room was nearly empty, Kalen spoke one more time, his voice soft enough that she barely heard it. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Amara didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, Ilara falling into step beside her, their footsteps echoing in the vast, cold space. Behind them, the king sat alone on his throne, a crown on his head, and a weight in his chest he hadn't felt in 1,000 years. And somewhere in the shadows, enemies gathered, sharpening their blades, waiting for the moment when the bond would prove to be not his strength, but his downfall. Amara woke to the sound of breaking glass. Her eyes flew open, her heart already racing before her mind fully registered what was happening. Moonlight spilled to the shattered window, and in that pale silver light, she saw the figure, dressed in black from head to toe, moving with inhuman speed, a blade gleaming in one gloved hand. She rolled off the bed just as a knife embedded itself in the pillow where her head had been seconds before. Feathers exploded into the air. Amara hit the floor hard, her shoulders screaming in pain. But she didn't stop moving. She scrambled toward the door, her bare feet slipping on polished wood. The assassin was faster. A hand clamped over her mouth, yanking her backward. The blade pressed against her throat. Cold, sharp, promising. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. Nothing personal. A woman's voice whispered against her ear. You're just in the way. The blade began to bite into her skin. And then everything exploded. The door didn't open. It detonated. Splinters of oak flew through the air like shrapnel. Kalen stood in the doorway, and Amara had never seen anything like him. His eyes were pure crimson, glowing in the darkness. His fangs were fully extended. The air around him seemed to warp and shimmer with barely contained rage. Release her. Each word was a death sentence. The assassin hesitated for only a fraction of a second. It was enough. Kalen moved faster than thought, crossing the room in a blur. His hand closed around the assassin's wrist, and Amara heard bone crack. The woman screamed, dropping the knife. Kalen wrenched her away from Amara, slamming her against the wall with enough force to crater the stone. Who sent you? His voice was no longer human. It was something older, darker, primordial. The assassin laughed, blood trickling from her mouth. You think I'm the only one? You think killing me stops anything? I think, Kalen said softly, that you're going to tell me everything before you die. I'm already dead. We all are. The moment you bound yourself to that thing. She spat blood toward Amara. You signed our death warrants. The withering is killing us, and you waste your power protecting a human. Understanding dawned in Kalen's eyes. This is about the cure. There is no cure. The old bloodlines are dying. We need strong leadership, not a king who's chained himself to a mortal who'll be dust in 60 years. The assassin's voice rose to shriek. You're killing us all for her. Kalen's hand tightened around her throat, cutting off the words. You're wrong. About all of it. And then he moved, so fast Amara couldn't follow. When he stepped back, the assassin slumped to the floor, dead before she hit the ground. Silence flooded the room. Kalen stood there, breathing hard, his hands stained red. Slowly, the glow faded from his eyes. The fangs retracted. He became almost human again. Then he turned to Amara. She was pressed against the far wall, shaking. Her hand, pressed to her throat with a blade, had drawn a thin line of blood. Their eyes met across the ruined room. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, strained. Amara shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands hovering near her face but not quite touching. "Let me see." She lowered her hand. The cut was shallow, barely more than a scratch. But Kalen stared at it as though it were a mortal wound. His jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump. "This is my fault," he said quietly. "You saved my life. I put you in danger in the first place." His hands dropped to his sides, curling into fists. "This won't stop. As long as you're bound to me, as long as you're seen as my weakness, they'll keep coming." "Then what do we do?" He met her eyes, and she saw the conflict raging behind them. Pain, guilt, something that might have been desperation. "I don't know." Guards poured into the room then, led by Lord Theron. They secured the scene, removed the body, began repairs. Through it all, Kalen never left Amara's side. He stood like a sentinel, his presence a wall between her and the world. Finally, Theron approached. "Your Majesty, we've identified the assassin." She was a member of the Eastern House, sworn to Lord Darius. Kalen's expression went glacial. "Where is he?" "Fled. He left the palace an hour ago. We're tracking him now. When you find him, bring him to me alive. I want to know everyone involved in this conspiracy." "Yes, Your Majesty." Theron hesitated. "The girl cannot stay here. This room is compromised. I recommend she stays with me." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Theron's eyebrows rose. "Your Majesty, that would be highly—" "I don't care. Post guards outside my chambers. Ward every entrance. But she doesn't leave my sight until this threat is eliminated. Am I understood?" Theron bowed stiffly. "As you command." When the guards finally left, Kalen guided Amara through the dark corridors to a section of the palace she'd never seen. His private quarters were in the highest tower, a suite of rooms that managed to be both opulent and austere. Black walls, crimson accents, furniture that looked centuries old. "There's a bedroom through there," he said, gesturing to a door. "Lock it if you want. I'll be out here." Amara didn't move. She stared at him, this ancient creature who had just killed someone with his bare hands to protect her. "Why are you doing this?" "I told you. The bond." "No." She stepped closer. "The bond explains why you don't want me dead. It doesn't explain this, the way you look at me, the way you—" She pressed her hand to her chest where the bond pulsed warmly. "I can feel you. I know you're terrified. Not for yourself. For me." Kalen turned away, moving to the window. "You should rest. Answer the question. Amara, please." The words seemed to break something in him. His shoulders sagged. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I've lived for over 1,000 years. I've seen civilizations rise and fall. I've watched everyone I ever cared about turn to dust. I stopped feeling things centuries ago. Stopped letting myself feel. Because what was the point? Everything ends. Everyone leaves." He turned to face her, and his eyes were raw with something that looked like anguish. "And then you kissed me. And for the first time in so long I've forgotten what it felt like. I felt alive. Not because of the bond. Before the mark appeared. In that moment when you chose to save me, even though it could have killed you," he stopped, his hands clenching. "I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's the bond or something else. But I know that when that blade touched your throat tonight, I felt more terror than I felt in my entire existence. And I won't let anything happen to you." Amara's breath caught. She crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of him, this close. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of centuries bearing down on him. "I'm still scared of you," she admitted. "You're still so much more than me. More powerful, more dangerous, more everything. I know, but I'm scared for you too. I feel what you feel, and you're drowning. You've been drowning for so long you forgot what breathing feels like." His eyes closed. "Amara, She reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek. He flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away. "I didn't ask for this bond," she whispered. "Neither of us did. But it exists. And maybe instead of fighting it, we try to understand it. Try to help each other survive it." When he opened his eyes, they shimmered with something that might have been tears if vampires could cry. "I don't know how to do this. How to be human, vulnerable. I've spent centuries building walls, and you," his hand covered hers on his cheek, "you walk right through them like they're made of paper. Then teach me your world, and I'll teach you mine. We figure this out together." For a long moment, they stood there, the bond between them humming with emotions neither could fully name. Then Kaelin did something she never expected. He pulled her into his arms. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't passionate. It was desperate. The embrace of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to hold another person, to be held in return. Amara felt him shaking, felt 1,000 years of loneliness pouring out of him through the bond. She wrapped her arms around him and held on. They stayed like that for a long time. Two souls bound by fate, standing in the darkness while the world conspired to tear them apart. 3 days later, Lord Darius was captured. The interrogation revealed a conspiracy that reached deep into the vampire nobility. Dozens of families who saw the bloodbound bond as an abomination, who believed Kaelin's connection to a human would doom them all as the withering continued to spread. Kaelin executed the ringleaders personally, publicly, a demonstration that mercy had its limits. But the executions didn't stop the whispers. They didn't stop the hatred. If anything, they made it worse. The nobility began to fracture into factions, those loyal to the king, and those who believed his bond to Amara would destroy them all. Civil war loomed on the horizon like a storm. Through it all, Amara and Kaelin grew closer. Alara's training continued, teaching Amara the intricacies of vampire politics, their history, their customs. But the real education came in the quiet moments, late-night conversations in Kaelin's study, walks to the palace gardens under moonlight, shared meals where Amara ate human food while Kaelin watched with something like longing. She learned that he loved music, but hadn't played an instrument in 200 years, that he'd once had a younger sister who died of illness before his transformation, that he collected books from every civilization he'd encountered, some written in languages that no longer existed. He learned that she'd grown up in poverty, that her mother had died when she was 10, that she'd taken the palace job to send money back to her grandmother, that she loved thunderstorms, that she sang when she thought no one was listening. They learned each other, and slowly, carefully, something began to grow between them, something more than just a bond, something fragile and real. But the world wouldn't let them have peace. 6 weeks after the assassination attempt, a messenger arrived from the southern kingdoms. The vampire lords there had heard of the bloodbound bond. They were coming to the palace to see it for themselves, to determine whether King Kaelin was still fit to rule. It was both a diplomatic visit and a trial. If they deem me compromised, Kaelin explained as they stood in the study, they'll call for my abdication. Or worse, they'll declare war to free me from a bond. Can they do that? They can try. His jaw tightened. The southern kingdoms are powerful. If they unite against me, even with all our forces, the casualties would be catastrophic. Amara finished. She moved aside, looking out at the palace grounds. When do they arrive? 3 days. Then we have 3 days to prepare, to show them that the bond isn't a weakness. How? Amara turned to face him, an idea forming. The bond goes both ways, doesn't it? You feel what I feel. Yes. And it's made you stronger in some ways. You said your heart beats again. You feel alive. Doesn't that mean that you might be making me more powerful, not less? Understanding dawned in his eyes. The bond doesn't just connect us. It completes something. Something that's been missing. Show them that. Show them that the bloodbound bond isn't an ancient curse. It's an ancient strength. Kaelin stared at her for a long moment, then smiled. Really smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, more human. You know what you are, Amara? What? Dangerous. He reached out, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate. "You're the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to me." "Good," she said softly, "because you're the most dangerous thing that's happened to me, too." His hand lingered against her cheek. Their eyes met. The bond between them pulsed with warmth, with something that felt like recognition, like coming home. "I need to tell you something," Kaelin said quietly. "Something I've been afraid to admit, even to myself." "What?" "This bond. I don't think it was an accident. I've been researching the old texts, and the blood-bound connection only forms under specific circumstances. Not just sacrifice, not just touch." He paused. "It requires compatibility, recognition. The souls have to match. Somehow." Amar's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe fate knew what it was doing. Maybe we were always meant to find each other." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "And maybe I'm starting to believe that you saving my life was the best thing that ever happened to me." Tears pricked at Amar's eyes. "You've really lived for 1,000 years?" "Yes." "Then you had 1,000 years to perfect your timing, because that was the perfect thing to say before war." He laughed, a real laugh, rich and warm. "I've had 1,000 years to forget how to feel. You taught me to remember in 6 weeks." She rose on her toes, and this time when their lips met, it wasn't to save his life. It was to choose it, to choose him, to choose this impossible, dangerous, beautiful bond that had changed everything. The kiss was soft, tentative, filled with all the questions they still had to answer and all the battles they still had to fight. When they pulled apart, both were breathless, the bond between them singing with light. "We're going to survive this," Amar whispered. "Together," Kaelin agreed. "And if the southern kingdoms try to break us apart," his eyes flashed crimson for just a moment, "then they'll learn why I've been king for 1,000 years." 3 days later, the southern kingdoms arrived. The throne room was packed with vampire nobility from across the realm. The air crackled with tension and power. At the center of it all stood Kaelin and Amara, side by side, the mark visible on her neck. Lord Arcturus, the eldest of the southern vampire lords, stepped forward. He was ancient even by vampire standards, his face lined with centuries, his eyes sharp as broken glass. "King Kaelin Valtherus," he intoned, "we have come to witness this bond, to determine whether you remain fit to rule." Then, "Witness," Kaelin said calmly. What followed was unlike anything the vampire world had seen in centuries. Kaelin demonstrated the bond's power, how Amar's presence sharpened his senses, strengthened his control, made him more than he had been alone, how the connection allowed them to move in perfect synchronization, to anticipate each other, to be not two separate beings but something greater. Ilera testified about the history of the Bloodbound, about how the ancient pairs have been the most powerful rulers, the greatest warriors, the wisest counselors. And Amara spoke, simply, honestly, about what it meant to be bound to someone, to choose every day to trust them, to fight for them, to survive together. When she finished, the throne room was silent. Lord Arcturus studied them both for a long moment. Then, slowly, he knelt. "I have lived for 1,500 years," he said. "I have never seen a bond like this. Not in strength, not in clarity." He raised his eyes to Kaelin. "You are not compromised, Your Majesty. You are transformed, and that gives me hope." One by one, the other lords knelt. The trial was over. The bond was accepted. And when Kaelin took Amara's hand in his, in front of the entire vampire court, it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a declaration of war against anyone who would dare try to break them,